right. Thank you so much for being patient with us as we get started. I'd like to introduce you to Wadi Pazos, our Chief Customer Officer here at PairSoft. Wadi, it's all yours.
All right, great. So hello out there, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. One of the realities of remote work is that you can work from anywhere, and I fully anticipate that some of you are truly working across different time zones. So I always cover my bases at meetings these days and say hello to everyone across the world. All right. So like Ashley mentioned, my name is Wadi Pazos, and I'm the Chief Customer Officer here at PairSoft. I'm one of the original founders of PaperSave, one of PairSoft's products, and have been advising organizations, some of which are on the call today, for over 20 years on business process improvement and technology. I live in Miami, Florida, with two of my three amazing sons. One is off at college, and my beautiful wife. And as you can see by my background, I love sun, beaches, and ocean, which is why I enjoy living in sunny South Florida. All right, so today we'll be going over the importance of digitization and automation when working remotely by covering the following topics. We'll go through how remote work has evolved over the years, plus the state and need for automation before and after the pandemic, how essential it is for scaling a business, and also for mitigating loss of productivity in the face of disasters like the pandemic, what to keep an eye on, and what to address in remote work environments to avoid key pitfalls, and where I feel that the world is going as it relates to continued remote work. So with that, let's see how remote work has evolved over the years. Remote work has been around for a long time. From the early days of NASA, where engineers like Jack Niles would take their work home with them and operate through communications and computer systems that were back at the office or at their headquarters and data centers. Creatives like architects, designers, writers have been working remotely since before the invention of the internet, converting their homes into studios to make their content and products, and then delivering it to clients. However, since the advent of high-speed internet, SaaS software, and the service economy, and globalization of businesses that operate it, many companies, including PairSoft, have shifted to running 100% remotely, running their businesses completely on cloud-based systems that digitize everything, avoiding any reliance on paper or other such physical assets to complete their work. Before the pandemic, we saw most of this being done by software-based service businesses, high-tech or fintech service operations, or e-commerce shops that drop ship their products, particularly new businesses founded since the 2010s. There were some businesses that did digitize well before this, particularly during the US recession in the late 2000s. Those businesses were doing so to cut costs through efficiency. Some saw the proverbial writing on the wall and were ambitious in their digitization and automation efforts in those early days. Others stepped into the need for digitization and automation to enable remote workforce while experiencing a tragedy. This happened to a lot of South Florida businesses, in fact, after 2005, when we experienced a record number of hurricanes that kept folks at distributed and remote locations for months. That year taught many of our South Florida businesses the importance of enabling remote work to keep businesses running and employees productive while they were stuck at home and other places, unable to come into offices or homes that were damaged during the storm for several months. With that, let's take a quick poll and ask our audience, how many of you were working remotely before the pandemic? Ashley, can you help me put up that poll? All right, great. So we'll give you a couple seconds here. Okay. All right, I think we've got in everyone's responses, and completely as I expected, most of you and most of us, most of the world was not working from home remotely before the pandemic, or working remotely at all before the pandemic. Great, thank you, Ashley. All right, so moving right along, let's talk a little bit about how remote work kind of worked before the pandemic and how it shifted over time. So as I mentioned before, High digitization and automation were something that only high-tech companies did before the pandemic. Many businesses pre-pandemic still relied on paper processes and physical human workflows and or emails to operate their business. These methods relied heavily on in-person collaboration to get things done, such as signing a stack of paper invoices to approve bills or payments, and walking that stack of bills over to the next person who had to review and approve them physically. Then the COVID-19 pandemic changed our world forever in early 2020. Quarantines and forced separations made in-person physical collaboration impossible. Businesses were on two sides of the fence at that time. You were either one of those organizations who had automated and digitized and were enabled to continue operating smoothly when everyone had to work from home, or you were prohibited from operating and were scrambling instead. Digitization and automation turned into a necessity, not just a luxury or something that high-tech companies did. All service-based businesses and many departments and non-service-based businesses who had not digitized or implemented automation had to quickly rush to enable their now all remote workforce. This was important specifically when it came to tracking work. It was easy to turn around and ask a direct report or peer in the office where they were on something. When everyone went home, that turned into an email, a text, or an instant message that may not be responded to right away, or a phone call that may go unanswered. You couldn't just walk up to someone's cubicle or office to see where things were. With properly set up electronic workflow systems, it is possible to raise the transparency for everyone. Reports and statuses in the system show where work is, and there's no need to even ask where something is in the process. Automated reminders and alerts keep us on task and honest, reducing things falling through the proverbial cracks. This enables extreme levels of efficiency for those organizations who take advantage of it. Industry research has shown us some interesting results coming out of the pandemic. Those who were prepared for the shift in remote work ended up being more successful over time. Automation has become the norm and is now something that everyone is striving to continue to double down on and improve and streamline beyond the initial efforts to just digitize post-pandemic. Also, an interesting point and a good read from Wired magazine, many companies are actually hiring more as automation and remote work have uncovered opportunities and shifted workloads from mundane and manual tasks to more intelligent, descriptive, and predictive analytic type tasks, or just opening up the road and our bandwidth to help develop new service lines, business opportunities, and markets, because we're not stuck doing those mundane tasks. That's what automation has brought to us. And with that, let's talk a little bit more about how automation helps us scale and also mitigate disasters like the pandemic. So here we are in 2022, and there's truly no turning back. I do believe that for some businesses, it would be important to have some of their workforce physically connected for at least a portion of the time, and that we may still see many businesses returning to the office part-time or full-time. However, that being said, remote work is truly here to stay, in my opinion. Regardless of some of our workforce being shifted back to the office, I feel that many companies will still need to continue to enable some form of remote or hybrid work scenarios, even if it's for part of the time and only for certain departments. Some businesses, like PairSoft, will never go back to an office. It's because of that I think it's a must for businesses to continue to double down on digitizing and automating, to continue to stay competitive in a world where we're moving faster than ever, feeling the pressure to grow more than ever and more rapidly than ever. And where a global disaster, such as a pandemic, or even a regional disaster, such as a hurricane or an earthquake, can disrupt our ability to physically connect. And a lot of work has been done. However, most of it has been rushed and not polished, put together quickly while scrambling to enable remote workforce during the pandemic. I think it's time to now go back and reevaluate all of our systems and processes and look to iterate on how we can improve them by increasing the automation and digitization that we've already started. With that, I'd like to take another moment for another poll and ask all of you, how many of you feel the software you use is sufficient for your remote workforce? Let's give you a little time. Thank you, Ashley, for the poll. All right, pretty mixed results. So we got 40% saying it's sufficient, 20% of you saying it's not sufficient, and 40% of you saying it's unsure. So I'm going to say that that's 60% of you that think that there's some improvement to be made, and I agree wholeheartedly. And like I said, I think it's now time to go back, look at your processes, and constant change is a constant, and improving is a constant. And I think looking back and seeing, okay, this is where we're at, and how can we improve, digitize, automate more, or measure more, is really kind of what we should do to double down. Great. We'll move on. Thank you, Ashley, for the poll. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls and challenges of remote work, and some of my suggestions based on experiences I've had over the years working remotely and managing remote teams. So I would say that, and a lot of us have all learned, that it's not easy to work remotely, especially across multiple time zones, as I've alluded to several times during this presentation. I think that the single most important enabler of remote work is an adequate set of tools. Tools that enable collaboration, that automate and streamline manual processes to reduce manual touch points. Tools that measure key performance indicators within a process. And I can't stress that one enough. One of the biggest advantages of automation and electronic workflow systems is that they give us the ability to track who owns what and where each work item is throughout the workflow. This is impossible to do when work is manual and you're still relying on paper processes. This data also gives us the ability to quantify productivity and use descriptive and predictive analytics to help us identify and focus on problems and/or uncover opportunities. Think of the level of intelligence that you can get out of a business's spending activity when implementing an automated procure-to-pay system like PairSoft. Systems like ours help you manage and control your spend and avoid overspending by using intelligent data to know where every spend-related task is in the process, to avoid vendor issues and late payments, and to take advantage of early payments and discounts. So if you're not already budgeting to spend on your automation efforts, then I suggest you make spending on tools and staff to further your digitization automation a priority and include it in your budget line items, so you just stay competitive with the rest of the world. One other very important thing to consider when operating remote and distributed workforce, especially across various time zones, is the timing for allocation of work. I've run remote distributed teams for most of my career. I've always operated out of Miami throughout my career, and I've personally run teams out of North America, South America, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. PairSoft has and has previously had employees on every continent except for Africa, and has customers spread across the globe. Time can work with you or against you. I always recommend, when you have a distributed remote workforce, that you stack responsibilities to take advantage of time zones, such as providing a team member or a direct report in Asia, as an example, providing them work at the end of the North American day so that the work can be done by the time you wake up. The pitfall is providing work at the beginning of the North American day and then having to wait almost a day and a half to get your results back. So organizing your work and how you assign and track it is really, really important when setting up a remote and managing a remote workforce, particularly one that's distributed across time zones. And this particular study with Microsoft and UC Berkeley is very, very interesting, and I agree with it wholeheartedly. It actually dovetails and segues right into our next section, which is, how do we continue to be successful in this remote work market. And what can we expect? So one of the tendencies of remote work is to shift to 100% disconnected forms of communications, such as email, text, or instant messaging. What I tell people is, you know what? Old-fashioned stuff still works. Pick up the phone and then use video conferencing extensively. One of the best things to come from our shift to remote work during the pandemic is how ubiquitous video conferencing has become. When done correctly and using the right protocols and etiquette, video conferencing can be a great replacement for physical in-person collaboration. I prefer to use it when working remotely versus just voice calls, even when having a one-on-one conversation. Minding body language and physical cues is really important for effective communication, and you can't depend on them if you can't see or experience them. We at PairSoft encourage and strongly recommend that our employees be on camera when communicating both internally and externally. Lastly, I've found that it is extremely important to build physical in-person meetups and or conferences into your budget if you have a very large remote workforce, to build and reinforce working relationships through social interactions in more relaxed settings. Certainly a good thing to do with all that money you're saving on offices. With that, it's important to continue to enable our workforce on how to work remotely. What is interesting to me is that a whole set of future workers, our children, learned very quickly and through a crash course how to work remotely through their experience in remote schooling during the pandemic. Training, education, and continuous enablement are necessary to keeping our workforce productive in this new remote market. So consider setting up workshops and training programs to teach some of the concepts I've gone over during the short presentation to help maximize the efficiency and productivity of your remote workforce. Last but not least, and I can attest to this very personally in my experience here at PairSoft, optimizing remote work sets you up for success when looking at stretching the boundaries of where you hire talent from. We at PairSoft can hire the best and brightest all over the world because we can quickly integrate anyone into our remote work processes enabled through automation. You will find that you may want to consider also doing this if you're not already taking advantage of a global workforce to help increase the talent and perspective within your teams, as well as to take advantage of cost benefits present in operating certain parts of your business in certain parts of the world. With that, I want to take a quick moment to remind you that we here at PairSoft build digitization and automation systems and can help you manage your remote teams and streamline their processes with our suite of accounts payable, procurement, and gift and donor automation systems. So be sure to check us out at PairSoft.com or email us at info@PairSoft.com for more information on our solutions. Thank you for letting me present today. And with that, we're going to open it up for questions from the group.
Thank you so much, Wadi. That was fantastic. As I said in the chat earlier, if you have any questions, now's the time. And thank you for a few of you that have already put in some questions for us. I'll start with those. And if those trigger anything, please feel free to type in your questions now. Wadi, one of the questions we had is, a big criticism of remote work, publicized by Elon Musk recently, has been that people aren't really working. What tips or experiences do you have to ensure that employees are actually working on the job?
Yeah, this is a great question. And so our CEO and my partner, Matt Cotter, drives this culture here at PairSoft that says we don't have to micromanage people. All right, and expect them to be at their desk doing work exactly when others are doing work. It's really about doing your job and then measuring what matters, right? And I think the most important things I've mentioned before, if you're setting up a remote work environment, is to have the tools to help you track and measure work, right? Because if you track and measure work, then this is less of an issue, right? I mean, even in the office, right? When you have people in the office, how many people do you know, are kind of on Facebook or social media or other things, while sitting physically in there in the office. So, it's really less about how you're set up and more about the people that you hire, the culture that you build, and the tools and systems that you use to measure work to make sure that everyone's being productive. And I think that's really the key.
Great. Wadi, here's another question. In your experience, is people management easier or more difficult remotely versus in person?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say it depends. I think it depends on your approach. Okay. I think you can certainly touch a broader set of people, particularly distributed across large regional areas, remotely a lot easier, and manage them a lot easier than requiring all of them to be physically in one place. I think like anything else, you've got to apply the right tactics to make it all work. So keeping in mind some of the things like stacking the work appropriate in order to take advantage of time zone differences, using tools like video conferencing could certainly make it as easier or even more efficient to work remotely than in person. So it all depends on your approach. And I think for some, particularly me, I've found my ability to scale and leverage as a manager easier remotely than in person because of how many more people I can touch remotely. But it's all a matter of approach.
Wadi, the timing
Great
of this
question.
next question is great because you kind of just answered it. With mention of time zones and their pitfalls, how do you provide fairness to employees when some are ending their days while others are beginning theirs? So if colleagues need to meet but can't overstep each other's working hours, how do you manage that resentment?
Yeah, this is a great question, and actually highlights something I think is really important when architecting a remote workforce, and that is, it doesn't necessarily make sense for all departments and all areas to be remote in a way that they're like fully, like each member is fully distributed. In some cases, remote work simply means that you might have pockets of people that might be together, right, at different locations, right, where it makes sense for those folks to have the ability to physically come together, right, but then also kind of spread apart when it's time to do individual contributor work, while then interacting with the rest of the organization that is remote. So what I would say is if you have a team that really needs to work on the same time zones together, and it's too disruptive to break up their time zones, then in the very least, even though they may be remote, clump them in the same kind of time zone location area to reduce issues like this. And I think part of this is just how you architect work. Now, if you have less frequent interactions, like cross-functional, cross-team interactions, then this becomes a lot less of a concern in my mind, because I think there's enough overlap in most time zones, and at least we can, architect that way, particularly for functional areas that need to communicate more often, so that it's not like you're running, for example, a sales team in very far East Asia, right? And a marketing team that's operating out of the West Coast of the United States, right? That might not be a very good setup, because those two teams need to cross-functionally communicate with each other a lot more. But let's say a support team that's running, let's say, in East Asia time zones, right? And the marketing team running in the West Coast of the United States, they interact less, right? So there's a lot less of this issue going on. It's a great question.
Okay, thank you, guys. We've got more questions coming in. This is great. Another question: what are your suggestions for working with people who may not be very technical and are not so adept at troubleshooting when things don't go as expected, or who don't have a good grasp of all the features of remote tools?
Yeah, this is it's a great question. Thank you, Pat, for asking that. Part of me says, people, folks do have to get with the times, and we have to enable them and train and teach them, right? But this is a reality faced by a lot of organizations, and I think some of this can be mitigated through the choice of tools, right? So trying to pick the tools and configuring them to be as intuitive as possible, and to minimize some of the disruptions, caused by breakages, in the systems and processes is really key in order to keep, kind of non-technical people productive. And then, education. I do believe you can teach old dogs new tricks. I teach my parents all the time new technology stuff, and they absorb it. So I think a lot of this can be mitigated through education, and then again, through the choice of tools that we use to try to keep them as intuitive as possible. And when I see my parents so heavily into their phones doing pretty much everything, I know that with enough time and education, folks that were all non-technical can pick technical things up, or at least use systems and tools that are intuitive. It is a challenge. It's something that you need to really work on.
Thanks,
These are
Wadi.
great questions. Thank you so much.
They sure are. We have had a few very specific technical questions on our PairSoft products, and I wanted to let those people know that I have your contact information, and we're going to have an account manager reach out to you directly so that we can make sure we get the answer that you need for your company. So if there aren't any other questions about remote work, then I think we can say good afternoon and good evening to those people. Thank you all so much. Again, I want to reiterate, if your question did not get answered, we will reach out directly and answer any of those other questions that are hanging. Wadi, anything you want to leave us with?
No, I just want to say thank you very much. And my name's not very common, so you can find me on LinkedIn very easily. So there's only 2 Wadi puzzles in the world, so it's very easy to find. The other one's my son. So if you have any other questions or want to chat on this topic, I'm pretty passionate about all these technology-related trends and things. Feel free to reach out to me at wpuzzles@pairsoft.com or hit me up on LinkedIn.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you, everyone.